Peppa Pig, the twin brother. One evening, Peppa Pig's family was expecting a guest. Daddy Pig's twin brother, Gilbert, was coming to visit for the first time in many years. Daddy Pig often talked about how inseparable they were as children, but Gilbert had moved far away, and they had barely seen each other since. That evening, the doorbell rang. Standing on the doorstep was Gilbert. He looked exactly like Daddy Pig, but something about him was off. His smile was too forced, and his eyes seemed empty. During dinner, he barely spoke, silently observing everyone. His movements were unnatural, as if he was learning how to use utensils for the first time. George hid behind his chair the whole time, and Peppa felt uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. That night, Peppa woke up to a strange creaking sound. In the hallway, in front of the mirror, stood Gilbert. He wasn't just looking at his reflection. His reflection was moving with a slight delay, as if struggling to mimic his movements. At one point, he suddenly turned towards Peppa. In the morning, Mummy Pig seemed worried. Daddy Pig was gone. Gilbert was still in the house, acting as if he had always been there. His voice was muffled at first, but as the hours passed, it started to sound more and more like Daddy Pig's. Throughout the day, he imitated Daddy Pig's habits. He sat with a newspaper, tried to joke, but his laughter was hollow. As evening fell, a muffled voice was heard outside. It sounded like Daddy Pig. He was calling for help. Peppa rushed to the door, but Gilbert was already there. He looked at her and slowly smiled. At that moment it became clear. Daddy Pig wasn't coming back. Gilbert had already taken his place. Peppa Pig, lost episode, silence. It started with a rasp. In the morning, Peppa tried to call George, but her voice came out weak, as if she had a cold. Mummy Pig gave her some warm tea. Everyone thought it would pass, but by evening, Peppa's voice had almost vanished. She tried to speak, but her words barely came out, like something was pressing on her throat from the inside. Sometimes her mouth moved, but no sound followed. She tried to laugh, but it was just an open mouth and silence. The next day, Peppa could no longer speak at all. She understood everything, nodded, gestured, but not even a whisper escaped. The family grew worried. Doctors came, but found nothing wrong. Her throat was perfectly healthy. And yet, Peppa was changing. She grew quieter in every way. Her footsteps, her movements, even her breathing. At night, it was as if she made no sound at all. George once said he woke up because he felt Peppa standing beside his bed, watching him. But when he opened his eyes, she was lying down, completely still and silent. On the third day, the whole house grew quiet. Too quiet. Even normal sounds, closing doors, clinking dishes, footsteps, seemed muffled. The radio wouldn't play. The TV had no sound, just a dull hum in the ears. Daddy Pig noticed that Peppa had started leaving notes to communicate. They were short. "I'm here. I'm not gone. Can you hear me?" But her eyes told a different story. They looked distant, like something inside her was fading. On the fifth day, she didn't get up. George woke to find her bed neatly made, her clothes folded on the chair. A single note rested on her pillow. "This is all that's left of my voice." Peppa was gone. No sound, no goodbye, no trace. The house fell into true silence. No laughter, no echoes. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Sometimes George looks at her empty bed and whispers, "Peppa." And in the stillness, if you listen closely, you can almost hear. This episode of the animated series, Peppa Pig, has never been shown on TV. Peppa Pig. Mom is no longer the same. The day was gray and rainy. The clouds hung low over the Pig family's house. The wind shook the trees, and raindrops drummed against the windows. Daddy Pig had gone out on business, and Mummy Pig went shopping, leaving Peppa and George at home. They played in the living room, building towers out of blocks, but something felt off. The house seemed quieter than usual, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. Time dragged on. It was getting dark outside, but Mummy Pig still hadn't returned. Then the lock clicked. The children jumped. The door slowly creaked open. Mummy Pig stepped inside. But something was wrong. Her movements were slow, uneven, as if her body had forgotten how to move. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, but she didn't shake off the rain, didn't take off her boots, didn't say a word. She just stood there, unblinking, staring at the children. The living room grew cold. The air thickened with a strange heaviness, like the moment before a storm. Peppa squeezed George's hand. Mummy Pig's eyes weren't the same. The whites had turned too pale, almost gray, and her pupils had dilated so much that her eyes looked like two black voids. But the most terrifying thing was her mouth. It hung slightly open. Her lips twitched as if she was trying to say something but couldn't. Peppa waited for Mummy to speak, but she just stood there. Then, she stepped forward. The floorboards didn't creak. It was as if her feet weren't touching the ground at all. The lights in the room flickered as though the air had thickened, turning heavier. Mummy Pig moved again. But now her movements became unnatural, fluid, like a puppet suspended on strings. Her head tilted slowly, and in the dim light, Peppa noticed something strange. Something was moving beneath her skin. Dark shapes slithered under the surface of her face, as if hundreds of tiny creatures were living inside. Peppa shivered, but the worst came in the next moment. Mummy Pig lunged forward, suddenly like a broken doll. Her whole body jerked forward, and her mouth stretched open wider than should be possible. Peppa heard a sound for the first time. Not a voice, not a whisper, but a chorus of hundreds of voices speaking at once. The house shuddered. The curtains twisted with writhing shadows. The walls cracked, and from the gaps in the floorboards, a black liquid seeped out. Mummy Pig rose above the ground. Her arms elongated, her fingers became too thin, and from her mouth something slipped out, black, writhing, alive. The shadows in the room folded into a single mass and swarmed forward. Peppa screamed, but there was no sound. All she could hear were footsteps coming closer, the footsteps of something that was no longer Mummy Pig. Peppa Pig, dark water. It started in the morning. Daddy Pig went to wash up and noticed something strange. Thick black water was coming out of the bathroom tap. It smelled faintly of smoke. At first, he thought it was just dirty pipes, but the blackness wouldn't wash away, not even with soap. Later that day, the black water appeared in the kitchen. It dripped steadily from the faucet, leaving behind oily streaks in the sink. Peppa noticed dark circles under Mummy Pig's eyes, as if she hadn't slept, though she acted like everything was fine. George became quiet. Daddy Pig stopped making jokes. That night, the room Peppa and George shared felt damp. There were no pipes there, no taps, but the air was heavy and wet. The window fogged from the inside. Drops gathered on the glass. The wallpaper began peeling at the corners. A thin black line crept in from under the bedroom door, as though water had seeped in from elsewhere. The next morning, George's skin looked darker, as if he'd gotten dirty, but it wouldn't wash off. His eyes were dim. He sat still, staring at nothing. Mummy Pig darkened first. Her pink skin turned gray, then nearly black. She tried to smile, but her mouth didn't move. By midday, she was gone. No one saw her leave. She simply wasn't there anymore. Only a damp trail remained in the hallway, leading toward the bathroom. Daddy Pig turned black by evening. He stood by the window, black tears slowly dripping from his eyes. Peppa watched from behind the door. He turned to look at her, but said nothing. A moment later, he vanished. His glasses were left on the windowsill, next to a stain that wouldn't dry, wouldn't soak in, wouldn't fade. George disappeared during the night. Peppa woke to silence. His bed was empty, his pillow damp. Beside it were tiny wet hoof prints. The bedroom door was slightly open. A thin black trail stretched from it into the dark hall, but where it led, no one could tell. Peppa was alone. She didn't cry. She simply stood in front of the mirror, watching as her hooves turned gray, then black. A moist shadow crept across her forehead. Her veins were dark. She felt no fear, only exhaustion. By morning, the house was empty. The taps were dry, every mirror fogged over. In Peppa's bedroom, one final message had been written by a finger in the window's condensation. Now we live under the skin. Peppa Pig. Something in the house. The evening at the Pig household was unusually quiet. Peppa and George played in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. The dim light flickered and a strange tension filled the air. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the trees like eerie whispers in the night. Shadows from the flickering television danced against the walls, elongating into strange, distorted shapes. Then the door creaked open. Peppa turned quickly, her heartbeat quickening. The door had been closed. She was sure of it. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig entered, but something was wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too silent, as if they glided rather than walked. Their eyes were empty, hollow voids, and their smiles were unnaturally wide, frozen in place like grotesque masks. The room grew cold. A chill seeped into Peppa's bones, numbing her fingertips. The air thickened, pressing against her chest, as if the room itself were alive. George clutched his dinosaur tighter, his little fingers trembling. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unseen dread. Daddy Pig's head twisted at an impossible angle, his neck creaking and popping as he turned 180 degrees to stare at them. Mummy Pig's posture shifted unnaturally, her body bending too far forward, her arms dangling lifelessly at her sides like a broken puppet. Then came the sound. A rhythmic click-clack of hooves echoed through the hallways, slow and deliberate. The footsteps did not belong to anyone they knew. Peppa grabbed George's hand, her grip firm, and without hesitation they bolted upstairs. Their feet pounded against the wooden steps, the house groaning beneath them. Peppa reached their bedroom, yanked George inside, and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. Silence. The handle began to turn, softly at first, then with more force. Peppa pressed her back against the door, willing it to hold. Then, a slow, deliberate scratching at the wood. It was faint, methodical, like nails dragging just beneath the surface. A breathy whisper followed, an exhale too close, too deliberate. The shadows in the room began to shift, stretching along the walls in odd, angular shapes, pulsing as though the walls themselves were alive. The air grew colder still, wrapping around them like unseen fingers. Peppa felt her heart hammer against her ribs, her breath shallow and rapid. The house no longer felt like home. It had become something else, something dark, something watching, something waiting. And in the suffocating silence, Peppa knew they were not alone.